Hello and welcome. You are watching Global Lens. I'm Parikshit Luthra. These are top global headlines.
Increase our trade with the US on energy products in the years to come.
Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal says India wants to increase the purchase of oil and gas from the US as trade talks resume. Goyal is in the US for the first time since US imposed 50% tariffs on India, partly as a penalty for buying Russian oil. External Affairs Minister Jaishankar calls on the Global South to renew commitment to multilateralism at a meeting in the United Nations. US President Trump meets Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif on the sidelines of the UN summit after claiming credit for the ceasefire between India and Pakistan once again. US government could consider scrapping the current lottery system for H-1B visas. HCL techs Roshni Nadar and many other IT executives do not see any major impact due to the visa fee hike. Majority of Indian CEOs expect India and US to stick to the proposed timeline and sign a trade deal this year. Straight to the day's global market action. Markets across Asia ended mixed, tracking declines in Wall Street overnight. China's Shanghai, Japan's Nikkei and Hong Kong's Hang Seng gained while the Korean Kospi fell. Back home, Nifty and Sensex also saw a sharp fall. European indices traded mixed while Wall Street opened in the red. Our top focus this evening as ties between India and the US ease. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in the US for the first time since the United States imposed 50% tariffs on India, partly as a penalty for buying Russian oil. Goyal said that India expects to increase its trade with the US in energy products in the years to come. Speaking at the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum in New York, Goyal said that India's energy security goals will have a very high element of US involvement.
The world recognizes that this is one area where we all have to put together. India is a big player in the energy field, as Parikshit just mentioned. We are big importers of energy from across the world, including from the US. We expect to increase our trade with the US on the energy products in the years to come. And be close friends, natural partners. Our energy security goals will have a very high element of US involvement, which will ensure high stability, which will ensure diversified sources of energy for India, and help us unlock limitless possibilities that the US on various fronts, energy and beyond.
Meanwhile, America's President Donald Trump has claimed that India and China are the primary funders of the war in Ukraine because of their Russian oil purchases. In his first UN General Assembly speech since 2020, he also hit out at NATO countries, saying they have not got enough of their Russian energy imports and hence they're funding the war against themselves. The Trump administration has announced plans to replace the current H-1B lottery system with a weighted selection process. The Department of Homeland Security has said that the selection will be on wage levels. The notice said that the new process would give heavier weightage to applications by employers who pay high salaries. The criteria would apply if annual requests for the visas exceed the statutory limit of 85,000. According to reports, Indian officials are set to push Washington this week for easier access for thousands of skilled workers, even as H-1B visa fees remain a sticking point. Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, leading the Indian delegation in the latest round of trade talks in Washington, is expected to raise the issue of smoother movement for skilled professionals, particularly IT workers. Joining us now to discuss this further is Tim Roemer, former ambassador of US to India. Ambassador Roemer, thank you very much for being with us on the program. Let me begin by asking you, we are back on the negotiating table as far as the trade deal goes, how do you see the sentiment in favor of such an agreement? What do you feel about the atmospherics?
Well, we're in a challenging time right now, and I think the first step to take is for both sides to just calm the rhetoric. Both on the Indian side, the rhetoric surrounding the U.S. not being a reliable partner or a backstabber on the U.S. side. people in the administration saying that the Modi government is a Kremlin oil machine. Take a step back. Let's get the diplomatic channels working again. The trade negotiations are back on track. Let's have President Trump hopefully announce a date to come to India to meet with the Quad, and on a first principles type meeting, talk about all our strategic common interests between India, Japan, and Australia. We have the ISET, which is now called Trust, new technology talks between the United States and India to engage in brand new areas on high tech and chip manufacturing. Maybe there's an initiative to announce in the next 6 months for both countries to work on AI and chip manufacturing together, because we are both democracies. We share common values on security and technology and democratic free speech values. So that's a common area for us to work on in the future. And our diaspora ties, our people-to-people ties. Let's make sure that Indian students can come to the United States and study in our schools. Let's make sure that on the visa, H-1B visa issue, that this is an affordable amount for people to, and predictable amount for people to be able to exchange, come to the United States, and hopefully create jobs in the U.S. by studying here. We want Indian students to come to the United States. That's a positive thing for us and for India. So calm the tension and let's talk about these great issues that have always brought the U.S. and India together in the past.
Right. Ambassador Roemer, speaking about that mandatory 100,000 fee that new applicants will have to give from the 2026 lottery cycle, how do you think this is going to affect the American IT industry? Of course, it is a setback for many Indian skilled professionals who would be wanting to go to the US for better job opportunities, but it is being said to be a loss for the US as well. How would you describe this moment?
Well, I think we need to sit down and talk to one another about it and try to figure out how this is a win-win proposition for both sides. It has been in the past where we are able to entice and bring in skilled, high professional Indian workforce people into our economy. Big studies, reliable studies from the University of California and Duke University have shown that when Indian students come to the United States and study for masters and PhDs and stay in the US, they often become CEOs and in C-suite level positions, thereby creating jobs in America with new unicorn industry, with new upstart businesses, and hundreds and thousands of jobs are created by that. So let's try to figure out the path that if it's currently at 5,000 and President Trump is proposing 100,000, and there are some wealthy CEOs in Silicon Valley in America and Microsoft and Amazon that aren't upset with that 100,000 level, that seems high to me. What about average people being able to come here and get skilled positions? Let's negotiate that. Maybe that's part of the ongoing bilateral trade negotiations. If Minister Goyal said that there's 2 phases to this now, maybe that's part of a second phase to negotiate some of that and get to, some of the tough issues on the economic side, the agriculture and dairy access issues that the U.S. wants, the clean energy issues, the LNG issues. This is part of negotiation for both sides.
We have been hearing this debate over H-1B for the past few years. Do you think, irrespective of who now comes to power after the Donald Trump administration comes to an end, there is going to be some drastic change in the H-1B visa regime?
I do think that, this is a bipartisan issue. Most Democrats and Republicans have always supported a strong strategic partnership between the United States and India, good defense relationship, a good understanding of China, a strong and vibrant Indo-Pacific with free trade, exchange of education and Indian students coming here. But around the world, as you know, you've seen this in India, it's in Europe, it's in the United States, it's in South America. there's a populism and a concern around the world about making sure immigration is fair, making sure that higher education is accessible and affordable, both to the people indigenously in the country, but also people coming in from different areas. This continues to be a sensitive area. However, the United States and India have always been able to talk about this. We have a trust-based relationship. We have 4.5 million Indian Americans living in the United States as residents. We have 300,000 Indian students coming to the United States. We have historically very strong ties between our two countries, back and forth, people going all the time for business and diplomatic, sports reasons, cultural reasons. I think that's going to continue no matter what administration is in there, and that Democrats and Republicans are going to continue to support a healthy, strong, vibrant, deep U.S.-India relationship. We've got some hiccups in the relationship right now. We will work through those. We will get through these disagreements, because this relationship is so important to both sides in terms of the people, but in terms of the strategic interests and the prosperity and peace of the world.
Right. Ambassador Roemer, what do you think will make President Trump agree to a trade deal with India right now? What will serve his political interests, and what will actually encourage him to sign a deal with India, set aside those additional penalty tariffs, and have a tariff level, average tariff level of around 10 to 13%?
Well, I certainly believe that the president, although I'm a Democrat and he's a Republican, I do think that he wants to get to a deal. It came very close in 2019 in his first administration. He ultimately pulled away from that deal. I do think that he wants to see as a series of components and agreements in a two-phase bilateral agreement. He wants to see energy be a big part of that. The United States wants to sell India more LNG. We want to cooperate with India on cleaner energy, whether that's cleaner coal, whether that's wind and solar, whether that's LNG. There are a lot of opportunities on that front. I think in the technology area, there is another machinery, equipment. When I was U.S. Ambassador to India, we were constantly selling India all kinds of different equipment, from turbine gas jet engines to defense equipment to C-130 disaster relief equipment. There's a lot that can be done there. That's a win-win proposition. There's a lot to be done, I think, on the ag and dairy issue. I know this is a very sensitive issue, sensitive politically to Prime Minister Modi. With an election coming up in Bihar, it's sensitive. Maybe there are some ways to negotiate that where small farmers in India are protected from this competition, but the bigger farmer industry is exposed to more competition from the U.S. And the consumer in India gets better prices as a result of onion prices coming down, pistachio prices coming down, dairy prices coming down, et cetera, et cetera. When Finance Minister Manmohan Singh opened up markets back in the 1990s to competition, good things happened in India.
All right, Ambassador Roemer, thank you very much for joining us with those views. On that note, we take a short break. But on the other side, there's growing international pressure on Israel to end the two-year war in Gaza as more countries formally recognize a Palestinian state. A deep dive on the other side. Welcome back. International pressure on Israel to end the two-year war in Gaza is growing. The United Kingdom, France, Canada, Australia and Portugal have formally recognized a Palestinian state. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that his government acted to keep alive the possibility of peace. France and Saudi Arabia hosted a one-day summit at the UN General Assembly on Monday to rally support for a two-state solution. Israel and the United States boycotted the summit. Israel's hardline government has warned that there will be no Palestinian state, while US President Donald Trump told UN the recognition of a Palestinian state would be a reward for Hamas's atrocities. However, he said that the war needs to be stopped immediately. But why is this recognition crucial? With France and the UK joining in, Palestine now has the support of 4 of the UN Security Council's 5 permanent members. China and Russia recognized Palestine back in 1988. The shift by Canada and Australia, both traditionally strong allies of Israel, marks a significant blow as it leaves Israel more isolated on the global stage. Today, around 3/4 of the UN's 193 member states recognize Palestine. That leaves the US among a handful of countries, including Germany, Japan and Austria, that don't recognize a Palestinian state. Let's not forget that the US holds a veto at the UN on any recognition of a Palestinian state. So a lot is riding on Trump. This brings us to the bigger question. What is Palestine, and is there even a state to recognize? Under the 1933 Convention, there are 4 criteria for statehood: permanent population, defined territory, a functioning government, and capacity for international relations. Palestine can undisputedly lay claim to 2 of these. When it comes to territory, Palestine claims the West Bank and Gaza Strip, but its borders remain highly contested as much of the land is under Israeli occupation or control. Governance is also complicated. The internationally recognized Palestinian Authority administers parts of the West Bank, while Hamas controls Gaza. Given Palestine's status as a kind of quasi-state, its recognition may be symbolic and hence may not change much on the ground. However, one thing is certain: if a Palestinian state does emerge, Hamas will not be running it. A UN declaration sponsored by France and Saudi Arabia in July declared that Hamas must end its rule in Gaza and hand over its weapons to the Palestinian Authority. To discuss this further, we're now joined by Navdeep Suri, former Indian ambassador to the UAE. Ambassador Suri, thank you very much for joining us on the program. How do you think France joining the list of countries backing Palestine statehood changes things for the people of Palestine?
I think when countries like France and UK, Canada and Australia that have been such strong allies of Israel, such strong supporters of Israel, join hands and almost in a coordinated fashion declare the recognition of the state of Palestine, it shows that in a sense there's a hardening of attitudes, that there is now a view growing in Western countries, other than the US, of course, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government has really gone rogue. They are acting with impunity. They are striking countries ranging from Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and Qatar with impunity. It's almost as if there are 2 sets of international law that operate. One, when you discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and another when you talk about Israel's actions in Lebanon or indeed in West Bank and Gaza. So I think you see that there's a line that is being crossed. Even countries like UAE, which signed the Abraham Accords with such fanfare just a few years back during the first Trump administration, are today warning Netanyahu that do not consider annexing the West Bank because that's a red line and we may be forced to review the Abraham Accords. But, Parikshit, there's a separate action that has taken place, which I think is more significant in some ways, which is the meeting that President Trump had last night with the leaders of about a dozen Arab and Muslim countries on this after his address to the UN. And while not too much has come out yet, but I've seen comments by President Erdogan of Turkey. I've seen comments out of Abu Dhabi saying that it was a fruitful meeting, and they are kind of hoping that President Trump, who is perhaps the only one who can bear influence on Israel, will use that influence to bring an end to the absolute carnage that we are witnessing in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli army.
That's an important point, sir. Do you feel that this kind of global momentum, especially we saw how President Macron spent a lot of time speaking about the necessity of ending this war, about backing Palestine. Do you think this is now going to put some moral pressure on Donald Trump, saying that US cannot allow this war to continue unabated and unchecked?
I don't know whether President Trump is particularly given to moral pressure of any kind. I think it might be more electoral pressure or pressure from his MAGA base that he's more susceptible to. But, in a sense, the meeting that we spoke about in New York yesterday was Act One of this drama. And Act Two will be when President Trump meets Prime Minister Netanyahu on the 29th at the White House. It'll be really interesting to see whether President Trump is actually able to persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I say this because sometime back I had done a piece for the Tribune, which I had called When the Tail Wags the Dog. And it really does appear all the time that it is the Israeli tail that is wagging the much larger American dog. And so whether the US intends to assert itself, because I'm in no doubt that the actions of Israel are hurting long-term US interests. The attack in Qatar was an embarrassment for America, which sees Qatar as an ally. It has its largest base in the airbase in the Middle East in Qatar. So there's a point at which Israel's actions will become counterproductive, even for US interests. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see that Act Two on the 29th of September and see whether that tipping point has been reached.
Right. What do you think about India's position in all of this right now? And what about the idea of a two-state solution?
So, India was amongst the first countries to recognize the PLO as the sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people way back in 1974. We were amongst the first, along with Russia and China, to recognize the state of Palestine in 1988. In fact, the government of India gave land in Chanakyapuri for the embassy of the state of Palestine. But that was before we established relations with Israel in 1991. And what we have seen, particularly over the last decade or so, is that Israel has become a major defense and security partner for India. And over the last couple of years, we have often leaned more towards Israel and occasionally at the cost of our traditional ties with the Palestinians. And you can see that this stems from a pragmatic assessment of our self-interest, perhaps in a narrow sense. But I think there is now a need to restore that balance that we traditionally maintained. When Prime Minister Modi went first to Tel Aviv and then later to Ramallah, we were indicating a dehyphenation of our Israel-Palestine policy. And I think we need to maintain that dehyphenation so that we treat both as separate entities and delinked ones. On the issue of the possibility of the state of Palestine, it is a really complex question. On one hand, the growing expansion of Israeli settlements, which are completely illegal in international law, that we have seen over the last decade and more in the West Bank, seem to suggest that it is going to be very difficult to establish a viable Palestinian state in what were either the original 1948 borders according to the UN partition plan or the pre-1967 borders according to various UN resolutions that were passed by the Security Council, United Nations Resolution 242, 338, and others on the subject. And yet, with all the practical difficulties on the ground, the reality is that nobody has a better idea. Is Israel, which sees itself as first and foremost as a Jewish state, ever going to agree to a one state where Palestinians have equal rights? Certainly not in the foreseeable future. So then, you're left to fall back on what is the only way to get out of a solution of a forever conflict? We've already seen it going for the last 80 years almost. What's the solution? It's a two-state solution, maybe with some caveats, but I really don't see any other option at this point of time.
All right. Ambassador Suri, thank you so much for joining us, explaining us the ramifications of this move of more and more countries coming ahead, joining forces to back Palestine and putting pressure on both Israel and the United States. Thanks for putting that into context for our viewers. We leave it there for the moment. On Final Cut this evening, Typhoon Ragasa makes a landfall in southern China. Strong winds and heavy rains wreak havoc in the region. Ahead of the landfall, China evacuated nearly 2 million people as a precautionary measure. At least 17 people were killed and several others are missing in Taiwan after a lake burst triggered severe flooding. Dozens more were injured in Hong Kong, although Typhoon Ragasa's intensity levels were lowered from a super typhoon to a severe category storm. It continues to cause widespread destruction. That's all for today on Global Lens. Goodbye and thanks for watching.